kind of talking around fashion and art. The main things people don't want to associate something that is usually being associated to craft as having some sort of artistic sort of value. And what it does mean that just because you can make a product, clothing, costume, doesn't necessarily place you as the artist. And therefore you need to come across as someone who has some sort of conceptual or philosophical sort of backing around what you're making. And that's just me trying to unpack what the difference is, right? If we're going to put fashion or clothing design in the space of craft. And so maybe what my work does is that I take up the role of the person who's conceptually thinking about the work, but multi-skilled as well. So I have the skill of making clothes. In many ways, it's just a medium for me to express what I'm trying to say. Specifically coming from this whole decolonial sort of perspective, right? The idea is always that the education system needs reforming because it comes from a largely Eurocentric sort of backing. It tells of a Eurocentric story or history. In much the same way, a fashion designer will go to school and learn a particular way of making clothes, which is by and large from a Eurocentric perspective. There's only maybe one or two exceptions to that rule, where maybe Japanese design is given a slight bit of acknowledgement for having changed European sensibilities. I kind of created garments during my time at Gavin Roger around this idea of drape. Besides the blanket stuff, kind of allowed me to think or to learn how to create garments aside from what we are told to create in the books, because you get there and you realize that you don't know a shit all about making garments, especially ones on the bias. And for people who don't understand what the bias is, it's basically if you take a square piece of cloth. If I can fetch one quickly, is that fine? Yeah. Okay, cool. So if you take a square piece of cloth, right, this is what you would call a cross grain. So the bias is basically, if you fold your fabric like this, it's that line that folds diagonally, and that has that absolute stretch. I came to Cape Town to be a fashion designer, or to expand on my fashion design. So I started in Pretoria. I did my degree in TUT. I worked for a bridal brand called Saint Laurent, not to be confused with Saint Laurent or Yves Saint Laurent. And they were a fashion and art gallery, and maybe that's what started the whole idea of, where fashion meets art. One feature that's prominent in my work is the grey blanket. And I learned about the politics of Cape Town. I got influenced by friends who were artists. And I learned about Cape Town through the people that I worked with. But also it's visually there. You come here as a tourist, it's one thing. And you come here as someone who lives here, it's a different thing. And I took part in my first performance show at Brandane Plus, which was what it was called back then, for Kanyisila Mbonga, who curated a show called Demonstrations Performing Being Black. From that moment, that was the first interaction, and then it went to site-specific sort of situations where poets such as Kulaka Putuma and Asanda Vokwana and Kanyisila and Mandla Mlangeni kind of would perform in a site-specific manner in Google Earth, and I had made garments for them from the grain blanket. So many people kind of associated to prison, the blankets that you'd get within prisons. My particular association or my particular influence was seeing it on the streets of Cape Town. You can see it's a jacket, it zips up at the back. When you unzip it, it becomes a sort of sleeping bag element where you could slip in. It is a homeless person that you most vividly see with the blanket. So in many ways, the garment or the material signifies a particular hierarchy within society, right? It's a cheap blanket. You get it from Pep, it's like less than 60 rand. So somehow that becomes it became a very like strong medium for me. It's interesting we want to signify individuals in such a sort of way when they could have some sort of internal style system going on without us knowing. So I was always interested in that idea of, is there a sort of trend in terms of ways of wrapping a blanket that somehow our being PC kind of takes us away from that human nature? You know, you can have nothing but still enjoy something. And so I started to create garments based on that, based on drape, and not these like very strict, figurative or recognizable or easily recognizable clothes.